Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sree Iyer. Joining me today is Kalavai Venkat, and we're going to be talking about this migration of Muslim migrants into Europe. Where did it all begin, and how does Europe see a way out of this? Because you can see in just about every country they are in numbers, there are nothing but unrest, and somehow these people are having difficulty integrating into a society, unlike the previous migrants that have been moving to other places. Let's welcome Kalavai Venkat and listen to how he feels this is going to be playing out and where it all started. Venkat namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Namaskaram. Glad to meet you.
Thank you so much, Venkat and viewers, please like this video because we're going to be sharing information that you perhaps know in bits and pieces, but Kalavai has this unique ability of putting things together to give us a cogent presentation, because if there is one place where one theory or one topic that will tell you what exactly was being planned, because this is not a 1 year, 10 year, it's a multi-decade project as to how things have led to this. So I'll yield the floor now to Venkat. Venkat, let's start by why is the West taking only Muslim migrant? Because if from India or any other country, nobody is getting a free pass. They are also joining in illegally now, but they were not preferred. What is happening now?
Sree, let's begin with the converse of the question. Okay, so why are the Muslims migrating? Not only to the West, but in the very first place, why are Muslims migrating from countries that are predominantly Islamic to countries that are either secular or Hindu or Christian or Western countries? Why are they doing that? Because I think once we ask that converse question, we will be able to see everything in the right context. We'll start seeing that the migration of Muslims did not begin in the last few decades, did not begin with just Obama administration or with, you know, Chancellor Merkel and others, but then it started 1400 years ago. To understand this, you have to go back to the concept of hijrah in Islam. In Islam, hijrah is the migration of Prophet Muhammad, from Mecca to Medina. That happens around 622 AD or 622 CE. And that's the first migration. But it doesn't stop there, because as we have seen in many other videos before, Islam repeatedly teaches that the conduct of Muhammad is to be emulated by all Muslims for all times. So that means nothing stated there is confined to a particular historical context, but everything stated in the Quran, the Hadiths, the Sunnah, everything is applicable for all times to all Muslims. So when we talk about that, let's focus on 3 or 4 verses. And I'm just going to mention the verses, but the viewers can go and then follow them up, read them up offline at their own convenience. But look at Surah 4, look at verses 166 and 89. And likewise, look at Surah 9 and look at verse 111. What is the gist of all of these verses? What do they teach? The first thing they teach is that it is a Muslim who migrates for the sake of religion, he is going to be rewarded on earth and beyond. Most importantly, it says that if you migrate to other countries, to other places, then you will be rewarded. And this is where we have to understand the distinction Islam makes between Darul Islam and Darul Harb. Darul Islam is the house of Islam or the house of Muslims, and Darul Harb is the house of war or the house of infidels or the kafirs. In other words, Muslims have to constantly wage war on Darul Harb and convert that into Darul Islam. In other words, the objective, the purpose of a Muslim is to strive hard to impose Islam on everybody on this planet. So as part of that imposition of religious doctrine comes the concept of hijrah or migration. So that's the reason for 1400 years, Muslims have always been migrating. Most of the times, it's through sword, starting with 712. Go ahead.
Venkat there is also another one, if I remember correctly, called Darul Aman. Darul Islam, Darul Harb, and Darul Aman. Can you touch upon that also so that people understand there are 3 flavors of this? whenever they migrate to a new country? Over to you, sir.
I'll touch upon that, but let me kind of complete the complete
Sure.
flow of
Sure,
this,
sure.
okay, so that we don't
Of course.
lose track of this. So from the very beginning, if you look at the invasion of Muhammad bin Qasim into Sindh, that happens in 712 CE, and that was also a migration, but that was a migration carried out by sword. And in some cases, Muslims have migrated uh, as traders. One example is part of their migration to Indonesia, but it originated as a trade, but that was also accompanied by a lot of jihad, a lot of uh, violence and other things directed at the native tribes. But they do migrate, and this migration pattern goes back 1400 years. And Allah makes it very clear in the Quran that those who migrate, if they successfully migrate to another country, then they'll be rewarded with earthly benefits. And on the other hand, if they die in the process, then Allah is obligated to reward them in heaven. That's eternal Jannat or heaven for Muslims who migrate and die in the process. So either way, it's a win-win situation for Muslims, and that's why Muslims have been migrating for for a long time. You know, they migrated to Andalusia, and that's why they still consider it as a lost territory, because once they have gained it, it always belongs to Muslims. So this entire Muslim migration has to be seen in this context of Muslims want to migrate because they are following a mandate of the Quran, a mandate of Muhammad, and the objective is to impose Islam on the rest of the world. Now, let's turn to uh, the modern West. Okay, why does the West want Muslims to migrate to Western countries? This is for multiple reasons. It started sometime in the 1940s, 1945, 1946 onwards, around that time. There's a really good book by Professor Stephen Shoemaker, which came out, I think, last year. It's about the formation of Quran. It's an excellent book, but as part of the book, he talks about how and why the whitewashing of Islam and then the embracing of Muslims happened in the West. Okay, it started in the Western Academy. To provide some context, in 1945, when Second World War ended, uh, boots on the ground colonialism came to an end as well. Prior to that, Britain, France, and all the other countries used to invade developing nations in Asia, in Africa, and Americas, and they used to colonize them, and they used to have soldiers on the ground. That's boots on the ground. However, post 1945, this kind of colonialism was replaced by more of neo-colonialism, where America preferred uh, dictators and other despots to rule most of these countries in Arabia or Africa, so that America could trade conveniently with them. And in the case of Arabia, America could get a lot of oil without much resistance. So part of that was making sure that you are not alienating the Muslims. And as part of that, a lot of academic initiatives are undertaken. So Shoemaker talks about one Professor Wilfred Cantrell Smith. Smith started as a professor at McGill University in Canada, which is Canada's top university. Then he also spends time at Harvard University. Between these two, I think he spent about 2 decades or 2.5 decades. Throughout, he made it absolutely clear that Western academics should only interpret Islam according to the Muslim beliefs. Okay, in other words, whatever the Western Academy is interpreting Islam as, then that should be acceptable to the Muslims. And this was made as a requirement for earning degrees. Without meeting this requirement, one wouldn't have earned degree. And over the next 2.5 decades, this became the norm throughout the West. So, in other words, the Western universities, the Western media, everyone started creating a completely whitewashed image of Muslims, of Islams, so that there is no resistance to Muslim immigration to the West. This was number one. Then the second reason, why do, sorry, go ahead.
What was his motivation, Wilfred Cantrell Smith?
So Wilfred Cantrell Smith was not acting on his own, right? So no individual possesses that kind of power. But in 1945, if you look at it, America was already in Cold War with the Soviet Union, with USSR. Okay, and America did not want any other bloc to align with the USSR or turn against America. So one of the key motivations was to get the Arab countries to be pally with America and with Europe so that they can get oil at a cheap price. Okay, that was the prime objective for them. And hence, to make sure that is done, what they went about doing was to whitewash Islam so that they can come across as someone, look, the West is not inimical or hostile to Islam. We are inimical or we are not inimical or hostile to Muslims, but we are actually welcoming of all of you. Okay, that was the image they wanted to project, and that was the main motivation why Wilfred Cantwell Smith starts this initiative, but he did not act on his own. He was simply acting as an agent or arm of the government. Okay, this was one trend, and then we are now looking at the trends that happened in the West that made it easier for Muslims to migrate, or kind of made the ground fertile. And look at the second reason. The second reason starts around 1970 or so. Okay, so this was the time America is waging a war against Vietnam. It started in the 60s, and then you have the wars of 1973 between Israel and the Arab countries and everything. And there was a general anti-war sentiment in American campuses as we see today. So it started off as an anti-Vietnam War sentiment. Slowly, it became, like Carl Gersham and Irving Ho point out, this also became by 1972-73 anti-Israel sentiment as well in the American campuses. Okay, so and then this time there was an anti-war sentiment. But what was this motivated by? Here, a very pivotal book was Orientalism, written by 𝗤𝙧𝙤𝙪. So 𝗤𝙧𝙤𝙪 comes out of Lebanon, and then he writes this book where he says any portrayal of the Orient, which is the East, by Westerners is effectively an exercise in racism, an exercise in colonial conditioning, and all of these things. In other words, his point is, if Westerners are critically examining Islam or Eastern cultures, then they are no different from races. Okay, that was effectively the message he got out, and he gets a massive following, and then many times more than that of Wilfred Cantwell Smith. And then, yeah.
Kalavai, is oil the only reason why this religion is treated with kid gloves, whereas Hinduism gets ridiculed to the ends of the world?
No, that's not the only reason. Part of the reason is monotheism. Okay, so the Western world for the last 1700-1800 years has remained very monotheistic, right? So in various forms of fashion, because monotheism is a spectrum. Islam is a very strict form of monotheism, whereas Christianity with its notion of Trinity, or Catholicism with its worship of Mary and all these things, are not as strictly monotheistic, but they still fall within the spectrum of monotheism. And hence, the West has always been more accepting of monotheistic religions than of polytheistic religions like Hinduism. That's one reason. And then the second reason is, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Venkat. We need to straighten some of these concepts out, because one of the mistakes that Hindus made was not to explain that even in Hinduism there's only one God, which is Parabrahma. And that Parabrahma had no shape or form, and to make it easy for people, they came up with the concept of polymorphism, where you could imagine whatever it is that helps your livelihood, you worship that. Whether it was a rock, whether it was Bhuma Devi, for example, a farmer would first perform puja before he plants the seeds. And even today, this is there. And then there are some lumpens in DMK. I think they may even change parties now. These lumpens will do whatever it takes to win. They said that, why don't you have a Christian come and bless this thing? Why don't you have a Muslim come and bless this thing? All sorts of illogical nonsense. They will not dare and go and tell in a church, oh, you're going to start a new church building. Why don't you have a Hindu priest come and bless it? That won't come. So anyway, these people have a certain narrative in mind and they're running with it. But my question overall is that, did we not do enough to explain in terms of what exactly is Hinduism or Sanatana Dharma?
And once again, let me park this question for the time being so that we complete the flow and come back. But I will definitely answer this question too. Okay?
Understood.
So what happens around the 1970s? Okay, they start inviting a large number of Muslims, because already the ground has been set. The media is very friendly, and then everything happens, and a lot of trends happen, right, in multiple countries, not only in the US and UK, but even in countries like Norway. So Norway, by the time, is getting heavily into oil production, exploration, and everything, and then they import a large number of Pakistanis. Okay, now if you look at Norway's population today, it's around 5 or 5.3 million, but then they have a significant portion of that population which is Muslim today. Okay, so this happens around the world. Okay, so but why is this, and what is the motivation for the West? Okay, the motivations are manifold. Okay, number one motivation obviously is for the corporations, because when a large number of Muslims come to the West as asylum seekers, okay, then what it means is they have to be provided a lot of benefit, medical benefits, okay, all the health care. Then they may be given dole in many of the Western countries. Okay, then they are provided housing, and we have already seen that in the US, many times, uh, even the veterans who have fought in Iraq or Afghanistan do not get the benefits that these asylum seekers are getting. Okay, so but who is the beneficiary of all these things? Okay, even though the government is giving these free of cost to the Muslim asylum seekers, this is taxpayer money. Okay, taxpayer money is taken and given to them. But who is providing the services? It's the private sector. Okay, so for the private sector, the big benefit is now a huge portion of this government spending will come to their coffers. That will enrich the private sector. So that was a big motivation for them. Then the second motivation is the supply of workforce. Okay, you look at the entire West, there is a normal progression when people come out of uh, economic deprivation into economic prosperity. Slowly they move out of automation, they move out of agriculture, sorry, they move out of blue collar jobs, they move out of agriculture. Increasingly the economy becomes a service centric economy. Okay, so that's what is generally happening in the West. So uh, there are always going to be industries like the farming sector, industries like cafeterias, restaurants, etc., where you will always need people to come in and work. Okay, so again, this is now a captive workforce for the Western corporations, and then the Western corporations also calculate when these folks grow up, they are going to come back and buy more from us, and there is a corporate greed, okay, which is fueling this. But an even bigger motivation than this is from the left leaning political parties. Take the US, it's the Democratic Party, for example. When they bring 5, 10, 15, I think right now the number is something like 27 million illegal immigrants in the US. When you bring that many number of them, what will happen? Fast forward 10, 15 years. Uh, most of the elections are decided by 1 or 2% vote difference. So that means if you're going to get a captive audience of 25 million people, that is a huge 8, 9% of American population. Okay, they can totally swing the elections in favor of the Democratic Party for decades to come. In fact, this will become a single party nation, okay, with the Republicans standing no chance of winning, because these immigrants have come in, these are asylum seekers, and hence they have this victimhood narrative, which they identify with, even though they may not have ever suffered any victimhood, but they identify with those narratives because that is their passport to the West. That's their passport to building their future. So it's this false narrative that sets their migration to the West, and then they are going to stick to that. And then when they have more children, their fertility rate is generally higher than that of Western women or others, Hindu women and others. And as a result, the Muslim population will continue to increase. And then they also have family reunion. We have seen that in most of the cases, the so-called refugees who are coming in are overwhelmingly men. Okay, I don't know the exact percentage, varies from one place to another, but by all measures, it's 60, 70% of them at least are men. Many of them are fighting age, and then they come in, and then eventually they'll bring back their wives, their families, and everyone. And so this number is going to expand like anything, and that favors the left-wing parties like the Democratic Party. And I think 3 or 4 years ago in India today, there was a report about the Trinamool Congress in the Indian state of West Bengal, where a Trinamool Congress politician very confidently stated that in 80 to 90 assembly seats, I think there are something like 220, 230 assembly seats in uh, West Bengal. Out of that 80 to 90, the victory of Trinamool Congress is assured because they have a large proportion of illegal Muslims, either Rohingyas or those who came from Bangladesh, who have been settled and who are now voting in Indian elections. So this is always the strategy. This has always been the strategy of the left to bring in often groups that cannot align with each other, but build an accretive model by portraying them as victims so that they will continue to vote for them. Okay, so this is a huge motivation on the part of the political parties. Now, neither the corporations nor the parties can really push such agenda unless otherwise the people have bought into that, right? So if you take uh, the West, if you take the US is an example I'm most familiar with, but I think this is largely true of Europe as well. So if you take the US, for example, uh, this current generation of white people are definitely not racist. Okay. But if you went back, if you rewind back 50 years, if you went back to 1960s, 1970s, there was some racism in the US. So the next generation, what it wanted to do was not only come out of racism, but basically reject everything the previous generation stood for. Okay. That was their way of signaling virtue. So some of you may be familiar with the psychologist, cognitive scientist, Professor Jonathan Haidt. He once made a statement that empathy is the cure for self-righteousness. Okay, which is a very counterintuitive statement, but a very true one, because for a lot of people, advertising their self-righteousness or signaling virtue is almost an obsession. It's like a religious dogma. So, for example, a Muslim would proclaim his faith by reciting the Shahada. Okay, and that's the way they tell the rest of the world, look, I'm a Muslim. A Muslim woman wears a hijab, or a Muslim wears his orangutan beard, no mustache, only beard, or trousers that hang above the ankle, and all these things to send a message to others. I am part of the Ummah, I am a Muslim, and hence I am either your friend or your foe. Okay, so likewise, people always signal virtue, people always advertise self-righteousness, but these can go out of hand as it has happened in the West, particularly the US, where a generation will now come out and say, they will go out of the way and say, we'll embrace all immigrants. Okay, this is a boundaryless world. Everybody walk in. Okay, if you don't say these things, then you are a racist. You are no better than those who are lynching the black people 70, 80 years ago. Okay, that is the overall message that has been drummed into the heads of Americans and generally Westerners from school days. So where immigration is no longer a decision, a considered decision based on practicality. Okay, whom would you invite to come to this country? How did we all come? We came from India to the United States because we had the right educational qualification, we had the skill sets, we had something of value to offer to American economy. We were brought in. Okay, and our kids grown up, and then they are now toppers in American academy or in the industry. However, uh, when somebody loses a sense of this pragmatism, okay, that your nation can be easily destroyed, but it cannot be easily built. Okay, people often lose track of this reality. How did nations form? Nations formed over millennia. Okay, sometimes even longer than that. So in that case, what happens? Uh, Similar groups of people, ethnicities, people who spoke similar languages, uh, similar cultural beliefs, similar religious beliefs, and all of these things, they came together, and it was an organic unit. That's how a nation evolved. A nation state evolved as an organic unit over several centuries and often over millennia. Whereas in the overall utopian dream, you can easily destroy all of these things, and we can say all of this is trash. We are not going to have any differences, and we are going to build a utopia. That's what most of the younger generation, especially the Gen Z, has been brainwashed into believing from schools. So they don't even oppose anything that is, uh, uh, if you oppose immigration, they will immediately interpret that as racism. Okay, so this is the common trend. That's why a large number of people are welcoming of immigrants, because this is very much like religious dogma. For example, if you raise a child as a Muslim, and then that child can never question that the Quran is a divine revelation from Allah through Jibreel to Muhammad. Okay, they will never question the behavior of Muhammad, because doing any of those things is considered a serious offense, and that's punishable. Okay, so if you are going to brainwash and condition a child from childhood, that child will not challenge Islam. Okay, that's why very few Muslims become apostates. Only a small percentage of them do become apostates. Most of them do not. Now, the same applies to everything. You raise a child from childhood and start indoctrinating the child that you are expected to welcome all Muslims, regardless of where they are from. And if they claim to be refugees and asylum seekers, you should welcome them and you should tolerate them, bend over backwards. Otherwise, you are a racist. But if you do all these things, then you are a very inclusive person, you are a woke person. And these are portrayed as virtues. And that's why a large number of Americans and Westerners have started welcoming the Muslims. And that's why you have a significant chunk of Muslims who have come to Europe and America in very large numbers. And that number is only going to increase because I think ever since Biden opened the southern borders, I believe most of the immigrants, going by the reports, most of these illegal immigrants are Muslims who have come into this country. You're on mute.
There is a plan there. I'm not sure if 100% or the majority is Muslims, Venkat, because see, Biden always tries to couch this saying only 4 countries, people from 4 countries who are being persecuted for their beliefs, it could be political also, are allowed asylum. For example, Honduras, Venezuela, and a couple of other countries I can't recall now, that's not important. Only these countries we are allowing, and the way it was supposed to have been done was you were pre-screened at the country of origin. So you kind of knew that with these papers you would get some sort of a hearing in the United States, and then once that hearing is successful, then you can live in the United States. Now, what has happened is many people have jumped on this bandwagon. In fact, we saw the case of a private airline airlifting close to 300 Indian origin people.
Right.
And they came to from various parts of India. They came to Dubai. They got together on a chartered plane from there. This plane developed a technical snag and it had to force land in France. And that's when they discovered that everybody was illegal. They were all headed for Nicaragua.
Right.
So mules have now started happening at a bigger level. And I did a back of the envelope calculation. The amount of money these people have to pay to just get into United States or beyond to Canada is running into $100,000, if not more. Now, so I'm not 100% sure in US today that the newer immigrants are majority Muslims, but a lot of them have come in. In fact, there is also an observation that many of the what I would call as deep state, not deep state, but spy organizations of even countries like China have also come inside, and terrorists have come inside, snuck inside from various parts of the world. So because there was for some time unmitigated, gates were open, nobody even checked. In fact, press was not allowed to come to the border. Correct. Biden administration has been a colossal failure. It's not even...
Oh yeah. So in fact, that's exactly what answers the point you started your question with, right? So do we know that majority of them are Muslims, or are they from those 3 or 4 countries where there is political or other persecution? The answer is very clear, right? You will know that only if you're checking these illegal immigrants at the border, okay? And then you're ensuring, look, where are you from? Are you from Honduras? Are you from Colombia? Are you from Cuba? No, that's not what is happening, okay? Those are being flagged, and you would have seen those videos where in the southern border, in Texas border, in Arizona border, the USCIS is just flagging in thousands and thousands of those people. So you do not know which country they are coming from, okay? That's number one. But why do I think a vast majority of them are likely to be Muslims? And that's because the 𝗏𝗏𝗏 magazine over the last 3 or 4 years has been publishing a lot of reports, right? So about a year ago, there was a report of 16,000 Sikhs who were caught on the Mexican border. Okay, so these were illegal immigrants who were caught on the Mexican border. So if 16,000 Sikhs got in, probably 100,000 or even more. Sorry, if 16,000 were stopped, maybe 100,000 or more still sailed through. Okay, so these are mostly Khalistani sympathizers. At the time, 𝗏𝗏𝗏 magazine also pointed out that each and every one of them paid anywhere from $20,000 to $75,000 per head to the cartels to get it. Okay, so these are the people who are spending a lot of money. Now, this money can be either your personal investment or there is a very planned investment that's happening. So now, increasingly, what is happening? Earlier, people used to come in from Mexico, but many of these are now landing in Panama, Colombia, and other countries, Nicaragua. And from there, they are put on mule trains, like you correctly pointed out, and they are not stopped. They are not allowed to get off in Mexico. They are not allowed to get off in other countries like Guatemala and other places. They are headed straight to the US border, where these traffickers get them across the border and they take them all the way up to Sanctuary City. That's why the price varies. So, and many of these people are not Hispanic people. And if they're not Hispanics, and we can obviously see from the photographs how many Chinese or how many white faces do you see. So, in other words, they are not from Eastern Europe, they are not from China, but many of them are from the Indian subcontinent and many of them are from Northern Africa. And these are mostly Muslims. Okay. And then the danger for this is a large number of them may not be paying the money by themselves. Okay. These people may be bankrolled with drug money and other things, okay, which is paid to the cartels. And if you're not checking who's coming into the border, then a large number of them could be terrorists, could be criminals. And one of their plans could be to bring America down from within. Okay. So this is the idea. Now, let's go back to the question you made about why this affinity towards Islam in the West. Okay, this always has been there. Okay, so like one reason I mentioned is it's a monotheistic religion. So even though there is rivalry, there is an acceptance of monotheism. If you look at Islam, Islam extends the same courtesy. There is 𝗤𝗍𝗄𝘗𝑒 kitab, meaning people of the book. Okay, so those are the monotheistic religions of Christianity and Judaism. To some extent, they can be tolerated. They are dhimmis. Okay, second-class citizens, but still they are tolerated to some extent, so long as they continue to pay jizya. Okay, whereas a bigger hatred is reserved for the polytheists in the Quran, in the teachings of Islam. The same goes to Christianity too. But by and large, the Christian West has always seen the Muslims as some kind of useful allies. Okay, and I already talked a little bit about the oil politics that happened earlier. But when you look at the Second World War, right, during the time of Hitler, okay, so Hitler went about wanting to get rid of all the Jews on the planet. Okay, so the gas chambers were fully operational from 1941 onwards, but this started even earlier. And at the time, there was what the rest of the world does not know is there was a close collaboration between the Muslim world and the Nazis. Okay. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, 𝗤𝙧𝙤𝙀 𝗚 𝗚𝙀𝘳, he goes to goes to Germany, meets with Adolf Hitler, and of course Adolf Hitler does not shake hands with him. Okay, he considers him to be inferior. However, he considers him to be a useful person when it comes to exterminating the Jews. Al-Husseini proposes that they could help in exterminating the Jews, and Hitler responds, "Don't do that yet, because we'll take care of them in Europe, but you take care of those in the Arab world." And Al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, is paid 750,000 Reichsmark by Hitler as a, was it monthly or annual? I forgot the number. He's paid that amount. And in Damascus, Syria, look at the distance. Okay, Jerusalem is where Al-Husseini lives, and Germany is where the Nazis are headquartered. And all the way down in Syria, in Damascus, they take a procession. Okay, Allah in heaven and Hitler on earth. Okay, we'll get rid of the Jews. That's the slogan. They raise everywhere. So Allah in heaven and Hitler on earth. Remember this, where, to what extent Muslims have put Hitler on a pedestal. Okay, it's not just the Prophet Muhammad who is, the final, the seal of prophets, the last prophet to come, and there's none after them. No, they are willing to make concession to that core belief of Islam and put Adolf Hitler in almost a comparable place, because Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews, exterminate the Jews, and that's something Muhammad wanted to do. That's something which the Islamic hadiths and Islamic texts repeatedly highlight, and hence Muslims have always been very pally with the Christian West and vice versa. And the Christian West has always been pally towards the Muslims. And even when you look at the Indian subcontinent, the British were always favoring the Muslims, okay, because for them, Hinduism was a myriad set of superstitions, okay, set of so many superstitions, okay, and it's a polytheistic religion. And then if you are going in with a sophomoric logic that, look, if there is God, there is only one God, how can you have many gods? Then, yes, this may sound uh, perfectly reasonable to a Westerner who has been brought up in this kind of thinking. And they always found Muslims, to be, in terms of their cultural worldview and other things, similar to Christians. That's one reason why they favored. And then the second reason is that uh, it's easy to control the Muslims than to control Hindus, okay, or Chinese. For the simple reason, we are not an organized religion. We don't go to the same temple and we don't listen to lectures. We don't listen to sermons. We are not members of a temple. We may go to a temple of choice. We will not even know the name of the priest, and the priest will not know your name or anything. Okay. So for us, it's only the connection between the devotee and the divine that matters in Hinduism. Whereas in Islam or Christianity, they are members of a church, they are part and parcel of a congregation. So in other words, if the Western colonial masters wanted to control, it would have been easier for them to control the Muslims, because all they have to do is control a few Muslim institutions and their leaders, and the rest of the community, the Ummah, will fall in line. Okay, so these are some of the reasons why the West always has been favorable to Muslims. Okay, now I want to kind of take a second to address your question on that polytheism, right? So you made a statement that, look, Hinduism is also kind of monotheistic because we have this Brahman. Okay, so that I would kind of disagree with. Okay, mainly because Hinduism, as most people may be already aware, we did not call our religion Hinduism, right? Hindu is the name given by foreigners, mainly Persians, because we have this river Sindhu, okay, or Indus. Modern name is Indus. English name is Indus. The Sanskrit name is Sindhu, okay, and everything in Sindhu became Hindu in Persian, and the cognate of that in Greek is India, Indica, and all these things. Okay, that's why Megasthenes wrote this book, Indica, and then the Behistun inscriptions, they talk about Hindus. Okay, Behistun inscriptions, or in Persia, they are from the 6th century BC. They talk about Hindus. Okay, because everything to the east of the river Sindhu or Indus was Hindu India, and hence all the arts, all the cultures, all the cuisines, all the religions, philosophies, traditions, everything, people, everything was Hindu. Everything from the east of river Sindhu was Hindu. But what is Hinduism? Hinduism to me is like a library. Okay, you have different darshanas. Darshanas are, how do we translate that into English? Okay, a view of a reality or a perspective of reality. Okay, roughly translated. So you have different darshanas, right? So some of them are non-theistic, which you may be already aware of, right? Like traditions like yoga, traditions like Sankhya, Lokayata. These are all non-theistic traditions, non-theistic philosophies. They don't have a place or a centrality for the divine. Okay, and then in fact, if you go back to the Arthashastra, Chanakya calls only 3 of such philosophies anvikshiki, meaning those which are more scientific or rational by nature, and those are Lokayata, Yoga, and the Sankhya. Okay, then you have theistic religions, and then theistic traditions like Vaishnavism, Shaktism, Shaivism, Kaumarism, and all these things. Within Hinduism, you have many of these things, and these are not necessarily one God. Then when we come to the concept of Brahman you talked about, okay, the concept of Brahman is something very interesting, right? So if you take darshanas like Advaita Vedanta, okay, in Advaita Vedanta, the nature of reality is not what we see. Okay, what we see is more of an illusion. Okay, to give an analogy, if you are falling asleep and if you're having a dream, and let's say you fall in love with a girl, and then she meets an accident and you happen to witness it, you will wake up, right? Your heart is pounding, you're sweating, and you are depressed. Okay, and then you wake up, all of your feelings are real. Okay, the experience I've had is real. If somebody checked your blood pressure, it'll be high, and they can wipe the sweat off your face and all these things. Your heart is pounding. Okay, but that girl just appeared in the dream. That was not reality. Now what you are experiencing in your wakeful state is reality. Okay. So Advaita Vedanta gives a similar concept that we are living in what is somewhat akin to a dream state, okay, where what we are experiencing is not false, but it is illusory. But when you acquire knowledge of reality, you will eventually attain self-realization. And in that self-realized state, all that exists is Brahman. In the case of Advaita Vedanta, it is Nirguna Brahman. And this Nirguna Brahman is without attributes and without differentiation. In other words, there is no duality. Okay, there is nothing to perceive, none to exist. In other words, it's not a monotheistic God. Okay, it is, if you take Advaita Vedanta as an example, it is a state which is no longer differentiated. Okay, in Buddhism, it's called the state of, a state that's characterized by shunyata, and hence it's called nirvana. So these are all very analogous terms, but then these are not identical to monotheism. And even when you take other bhakti traditions like Vaishnavism or Shaivism and others, what do you find? Mahavishnu has a consort, right? She is Sri Lakshmi. Then Shiva has a wife. She is Parvati. Okay, it's not monotheism. Okay, these gods are uh, married. These gods have children. They have families. So ours is a very rich religion, and I wouldn't like to confine it to the narrow confines of monotheism. Even though I know a lot of Hindus sometimes use that phrase, but monotheism has a very specific meaning, Sree Iyer, because if you look at it, all monotheistic religions are also iconoclastic, right? Iconoclasm means an opposition to icons, iconography. Okay, so when you go to a temple or even at home, when you have a deity, okay, it's an idol, right? It's a deity, and then we worship that. We are not worshiping the stone or the metal of which it is made. Okay, we see that as a symbol, as something symbolic of a divine presence. Okay, that's why even the rivers are divine in Hinduism. You go to Ganga, Ganga is sacred. You go to Kaveri, Kaveri is sacred. These all symbolize. Whereas in monotheistic religions, they hate iconography. They are all iconoclastic because monotheism is premised on destroying all the other forms of worship. So if you go to the Middle East, if you go to Far East, if you take places like Petra in Jordan, that was the place of a lot of Arab polytheism. They had many gods, okay? Each god for a region, each god for a geography, for example. And people used to come and worship. What they will do, if you are a trader walking from one town to another to sell your goods, on the way you will stop and you will pay your respects to the deity of that place, and then you will move on. So that's why people learn to respect each other. Whereas monotheism said, get rid of all the deities, no iconography, because so long as those icons are there, you'll be reminded of those deities. Instead, replace them with a formless God, the God of monotheism. Okay. Only the definitions of this monotheism vary a little bit from one religion to another, Islam being the most extreme, but all of these religions are at core monotheistic because they are opposed to pluralism. They are opposed to diversity of thoughts, diversity of sacred expressions, and diversity of arts and everything. Okay, that's the major difference.
A few things that I might also disagree. One, the reason I brought this thing up was I wanted to say there is only one God, but in Sanatana Dharma there is polymorphism. Not polytheism, but polymorphism. Slightly different context. I think we'll take this thing on a separate session where we can actually discuss this. See, look, you took you 15 minutes to explain this, right? Now, the average Sanatani doesn't know all this stuff. When you get confronted, oh, you have a million gods, right? Immediately the person is on the defensive. The other side knows how to put you on the defensive. You don't have a way to attack them because the moment you say
no, we can very easily do that. So it's like my response to that will be very simple, right? Having one God is like having sex in only one position all your life. Okay. Whereas having many gods is like enjoying sex, romance, everything in its complete spectrum, okay, throughout your life. Okay. You want to be very boring, okay, and have sex only in one position throughout your life, go and do that. That's monotheism for you. Whereas if you want to explore that more, explore Kama Sutra in practice, come to Hinduism.
Look, we all know what happened to Nupur Sharma. She's still in the boondocks, unfortunately. See, reality is a little bit different. See, you can make your argument to somebody who's literate, Venkat. There are semi-literates. There are madrasa chaps. These people don't understand anything unless you tell them in their own language. That's what Nupur Sharma was trying to do.
Correct.
Unfortunately, to disastrous consequences. So anyway, we understand where we are coming from.
Understood. On that, I am worried about a lot of Hindus, right? A lot of Hindus don't understand Islam. Okay, but among them, the educated Hindus are the most illiterate, and even worse than them are the educated Westerners, especially the college-going kids of the West, who are completely illiterate of Islam, right? So very few of them know anything about Islam, okay? And then they have drunk the Kool-Aid of Islamophobia, so they wouldn't criticize. And for them, it is a self-righteous expression when they welcome and embrace the Muslims. Okay, so this has acquired the proportion of a social pandemic in the West, right? And I think at least on that count, Hindus are slightly better, a little bit more informed. At least section of Hindus are better informed than the white people of the West, I would say, by and large.
Yes, indeed. And let's take a few questions, Venkat.
Yeah.
Can we have questions, please? Soham, thank you so much. Sir, are the US laws strong enough to stop Islam?
No, they are not. On the contrary, they are facilitating. Sree Iyer and I talked about illegal immigration of Muslims, and that's happening unabated. And not only that, during the anti-Israel / pro-Palestine / pro-Hamas protests, we saw a lot of things, right? In the US, they blocked Times Square in New York, and then they offered namaz right in the street. Think of it. New York is such a crowded city. Okay, New York city is not just crowded, it is packed. People don't have place to walk. It is such a place where with impunity, hundreds of Muslims will gather, they will do namaz, and the police will silently look on. Okay, this happened everywhere, and the Jewish students were repeatedly attacked, and call for the genocides of Jews was made in American universities, like top schools like Columbia, Harvard, and other places. And no, the American law has not been able to stop any of these things. And if at all anything, in many places, especially by the corporations, Islamophobia has been turned into a dogma, meaning any criticism of Islam or Muslims will immediately be called Islamophobia, and you will lose your job, and other things could happen. Okay, so no, the laws in America are not strong enough to stop Islam, and I don't think the laws in any country are strong enough to stop that. That's why all this need for education, because we need to understand what the problem is and what is in store for us if you want to stop it in the future.
Next one, please. Thank you, Kiran Meda. Thank you, Full Metal Heart. In a first, OpenAI removes influence ops targeting BJP Indian Express influence campaign from Israel, promoting Congress. Urgent views. I don't know what you said here. It looks like Telegram. I don't know. Maybe Kalavai, you can understand what he's trying to say.
No, I know. So basically, they are saying the OpenAI removes all this influence ops and other things, but I don't know what the question is.
Right.
Yeah, all these tech companies have been doing that. It's nothing new. Okay, so they all have the extreme left pro-Islamic bias, and we have seen Meta doing that. We have seen YouTube doing that, and it's not only in this issue, but even when it came to COVID. Okay, the voices of very eminent scientists like Michael Levitt, Nobel Prize winner in medicine, and Stanford professor J. Bhattacharya, Stanford professor of medicine, they were all suppressed by YouTube and others. Okay, so there's nothing new except that with Gen AI technology, OpenAI and others would do that even more, because people are increasingly lazy. They are not going to scratch the surface and research anything more.
Next one, please. Maithili wants to know, Sreeji, why Biden administration is just not taking any action? It is your taxpayers' money which is being distributed. Yes, Maithili ji, I am outraged. But I've been saying this for 4 years. What have we been able to manage? All people think that this guy is a noisy guy. That's all they think. Anyway, I'll leave you to your thoughts on this one, Venkat ji.
No, I think like I mentioned, there is a reason why the Biden administration is doing this, right? You bring in more Muslims, that's an assured vote bank for Democrats for decades to come. And if you bring in something like 7 or 8 million Muslims, fast forward 20 years, they would have had children and they would have brought their families from back home. And then there are family reunion laws. When these people become citizens, asylum seekers become citizens, they'll bring back their parents and everyone. So before you blink your eye, this population would have increased by leaps and bounds, and they'll assure victory to the Democrats in election after election by demanding their own Shylock's share of pound of flesh. Okay, and it's a very simple calculation. It's a very uh, short-sighted calculation because just to stay in power, they are destroying America. But right now, what we are dealing with is a social contagion in America, where a large number of people or so dogmatic, especially those who are uh, college educated kids are completely dogmatic and they don't even understand this problem and you cannot even educate them. You try telling them about this problem, it's as uh, they are going to be as responsive as Muslims uh, when they hear criticism of Islam. Okay, they will either ignore you and walk away, or they will fly into a fit of rage, and then they'll be close to the idea. Okay, so this is a calculated strategy on the part of the Democrats, and it is not something that's happening out of their control. Okay, they have done everything to facilitate this.
Next one, please. Manop-san wants to know, seems like Washington elites are running US like an empire and need to diversify their population to pursue divide and rule while importing migrants as their obedient sepoys. Is it sustainable?
It's not sustainable because we already know that Denmark uh, used to be the perfect Scandinavian social welfare system a few years ago, until a few years ago. Okay. And then, or a few decades ago. And that was mainly because it's a homogeneous country with a small population. I don't recall the exact population, maybe 7, 8 million population. And then it's a very homogeneous country. And then highly educated people with a higher average IQ, and they contributed to their system, right? It was their system. They worked hard. They made contribution. The system was sustainable. But the moment a lot of these immigrants, Muslim immigrants, started coming in, they became a burden on the social security system because they were not contributing, but they were getting money out of that. Okay, and then now sustaining a large number of them made the system unfeasible. And this is the reality everywhere. A large number of these people who are coming in, like for example, you heard the slogans on the streets of London that they want Sharia. Okay, by varying yardstick, depending on how you measure, a large number of Muslims do support these ideas in the West. Okay, these are Muslims who have been born and brought up in the West. They support such ideas. The percentage varies, but something like, 2/3 of them, they want Sharia. Only 1/4 of them will condemn Hamas as a terrorist organization, and the rest will not, and all these things. Okay, so and in the long run, this is simply not sustainable. This will destroy civilization because a lot of times I've explained that the left and Muslims are allies for half of the journey, where they share the common goal. What is that common goal? The common goal is the destruction of the culture and the roots of the native society. Okay, so if it's a Western society, then the Western civilization and the quote within quote white culture must be destroyed. If it is India, Hindu civilization must be destroyed. But what do they replace it with? Muslims are absolutely clear that they want to replace it with Islam, Sharia, and all the other things. Okay, hijab and everything. And the leftists are daydreaming that their ideology, their utopia is so attractive that even the Muslims will embrace it one day. And of course, we know that's not going to happen because Muslims who were born in UK are more fanatical, more radicalized than Muslims who immigrated into UK. Okay, so in other words, your immigrant parents from Pakistan were less radicalized than the Muslims born in UK today. Okay, so this is something which one study, one survey after another has brought out. Okay, so what it means is more and more of them fled the Western countries. The left will form a partnership with them, at least for half of the journey. Then they will start fighting each other. But when they start fighting each other, none of us would be left. Okay, our civilization would have been destroyed. So in the long term, it's completely unsustainable.
Next question, please. Best video selected wants to know, what are local white people on the street thinking is happening in US?
Again, this is always going to be anecdotal evidence because people coming out in the media express themselves, right? The people on the street, we do not know whether they are the representative sample or not. But I do think that a lot of surveys indicate that a large number of Americans are seriously concerned about the the migration, the immigration problem across the border. That a large number of illegals are coming in, but I do not know whether they understand anything deeper than that. Okay, they do suspect that this is all happening so that the Democrats could win elections for decades to come. But beyond that, they don't really understand Islam and what it means to them. Okay, because there's a huge difference. If 2 million Chinese immigrants or 2 million Hindu immigrants are going to, or Polish immigrants are going to walk into the US tomorrow, even illegally, okay, I will only object to the part that they came in illegally, but I won't worry about what they would do to America in the decades to come. Okay, because the Chinese mom, the Hindu mom, or the Buddhist mom, or the Polish mom will go ahead and educate her son or daughter to become a nurse, to become an accountant, or to become a computer engineer. Okay, and in 20 years down the line, what you would find is these people would be starting up companies in the Silicon Valley. They would become bankers in Wall Street and everything. Whereas it's very different when it comes to Muslims, because for Muslims, they are Muslims first, then Pakistanis, then British, then Americans, whatever it is. Okay. And then their worldview is governed by Islam. And then there is always going to be a large number of Muslims who are highly radicalized. Okay. So there was a great academic, that is, he's still alive. His name is Salim Mansour. He taught political science at the University of Western Ontario, and he testified before the Canadian House of Commons a decade ago. And he pointed out that all Muslims are either conservatives or radicalized. Okay. So there are no liberal Muslims. Okay. There are very few. If at all there's any, we do not know that they exist. They don't show their face in public. So they are very conservative or radicalized. And that means eventually the pendulum is going to swing in one direction, which is not in favor of civilization.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thank you so much, Kalavai Venkat. I'm really moved because what you're saying, when people pay attention and listen to what you're saying, and since I've done these sessions now, the meaning for me is much more deeper, because I have the benefit of having listened to you for 4 or 5 episodes thus far, and I feel like this is a quicksand that we are all in.
Correct.
Except that the quicksand is, moving so slowly that we are not realizing that we are slowly getting buried, perhaps 0.1 millimeter a time. And we need to wake up. Really, this is a problem. And the way the politics is moving in the United States, the less said, the better. I don't want to talk about that here today. To say I'm disappointed with what happened yesterday is an understatement. But it was known. This is the only way they can subvert democracy, in my opinion. Thank you so much, Venkat. And we'll be back, viewers, next week. I just want all our viewers to help us out here. You are part of probably many WhatsApp groups, maybe Facebook, in other social media handles. Do share a link to this video amongst all these things, because many of us are sleepwalking through, especially Sanatanis. We are sleepwalking through our religion. We don't think of it unless we have a problem. That's not the way it is. We could be practicing yoga every day for a few minutes. We don't do that. Unless you have a problem that allopathy is not able to solve, then somebody suggests, have you tried yoga? And then suddenly you're doing it. So I don't want this crisis-driven religionism. I would rather have it as part of your thing, like we brush our teeth, just think of God. And I'm not saying any specific God. Where Venkat touched upon Advaita, beautifully done. And again, the more I listen to experts, the more I myself understand Sanatana Dharma. I hope, viewers, it is the same for you all. Please, by way of comments, do express what you think of this video, and we will try to interact with you as much as possible. Venkatji, namaskar. Thank you so much.
Namaskar. Thank you very much.
Bye.